This new Prime 3D feature drop is a big one, and it unlocks some exciting new features for multicolour 3D printing, which many of you have been asking for. There's a lot packed into this update, and I think you're going to like it, so let's take a look. Since I released the photo projection tool for Prime 3D, the response has been overwhelmingly positive, and you've had some fantastic suggestions for new features and improvements. I'm excited to say that some of the most requested features and improvements are being rolled out in this update, and there's quite a lot to get through, so let's dive in. One of the main headliners for this update is that you can now import OBJs complete with UV maps, both with and without MTLs. This includes 3D scans, pre-painted CAD exports, and AI-generated models with color texture. This means that you can import 3D models with intricate color textures featuring gradients and shading, and either convert it into dithered color lines for CMYK printing, or you can export using block color mode and simply use Prime 3D to convert it into a slicer-compatible format for conventional multicolor printing. As I said, there's a lot of new features and tools to go over, but let's start out with importing OBJs. As well as being able to select STLs and 3MFs, you can now select OBJs when importing into Prime 3D. If there are also image files and/or an MTL for your OBJ, select them at the same time when importing. Now, in previous versions, some of you have found that you get an out-of-memory error when you try to load or process larger files, even if your computer has tons of RAM. That's primarily due to a limitation on the web browser. However, in this latest version, I've optimized the import and processing workflow, and I've not had a single failure with Prime 3D since. When importing an OBJ, depending on where it was created, the first thing that you'll likely want to do is orient and scale it. This clown, for example, imported at just 1.11mm high, so we'll obviously want to fix that. It's important to have the model in the orientation and scale that you plan to print it in before you process it in Prime 3D, so it's good practice to do this straight after import. With the Orient tool, as well as being able to click on the part of the model that you want face down on the print bed, we now also have slider controls allowing more manual adjustment of the orientation. And we'll get that scaled up. Now up here you can see it says Imported Colors. This is showing you the model with the UV map as imported. However, due to the way that the colors have to be converted at the moment on import, this isn't necessarily how the colors will be represented when we process it. If we change the view mode by clicking Show Pre-Processed Colors, this will show us how the painting will be applied to the model with its existing geometry. This has obviously become more pixelated and doesn't look as clean, as this provides just a single color for each triangle of the geometry. If you find that the colors aren't as finely detailed as you'd like, there is now a fix for this. Over here we have the Increase Resolution tool. This subdivides every triangle of the geometry to allow an increased variance in the color. You can select how many times you want each triangle to be divided. The more subdivisions, the better the detail of the color, but the larger the file size will be. Let's select Aggressive, which will divide each triangle by 64 times, then click Apply. This warning says that this cannot be undone, but don't worry, this isn't editing the original file on your computer, and if you want to undo this, you can just reload the model. This just means that you can't undo or Control or Command Z to undo this inside Prime 3D. With that processed, it then applies the original UV map to the newly generated mesh, and if we switch between the two modes, you can see that there's now almost no change in the painting between the two modes. The white glow in the pre-processed view is just highlighting the edges of the faces, and that won't come out in your export. If after this you still require more detail, you can run the Increase Resolution tool multiple times, but there is a safety limit to prevent creating a model so complex that Prime 3D may struggle to handle it. Now you may have noticed above the Increase Resolution tool we have Simplify Colors. If you find that there's too much variance in the colors for the size that you're printing, and it means that the dithered color lines look too messy whilst trying to represent each tiny area of different color, you can reduce the overall colors here. you can select how many colours you want the model to feature. If I set this to 32 colours, it doesn't look that different, so it may improve our resulting print without losing noticeable detail. If I set this to just 4 colours, however, you can see the entire model is reduced just to 4 colours. Currently, it automatically merges the most similar colours to achieve the number that you've selected, but I do plan to add an ability so you can select which colours will be remaining and which colours will merge together in a future update. As well as being useful for simplifying your CMYKW dithered prints, this is also a valuable tool if you wanted to convert a UV mapped OBJ to be printed in the conventional multicolor 3D printing method. So if, for example, you can only print with 4 colours at a time, you could import your UV mapped model, which features gradients and shading and potentially hundreds of colours, then reduce it to just 4 colours, clean up any areas that you like, export it in block colour mode, and it'll be ready to print just like any normal model. Unlike the increase resolution tool, simplify colours can be undone without having to reload the model by hitting the undo button or by just pressing Ctrl Z on Windows or Command Z on Mac. Next, you can paint your model however you want with the painting tools, and this takes us to a few new features and improvements. Whilst the brush and sphere tools don't have any new functions, in previous versions of Prime 3D there was a slight offset between where you tried to apply the brush or a photo using the photo projection tool and where it actually got painted on the model. This has seen a significant improvement now and allows for a lot more accuracy with your painting. As a note, if you find when painting with the brush tool that it's not a smooth line, just try moving the brush a little slower. And this leads me to another thing which I think a lot of you will like. In previous versions of Prime 3D, completely flat surfaces weren't really suitable for painting. With a cube where each face is just 2 triangles, the brush tool and gradient tools were pretty useless, and the photo projection tool even more so. Now, however, with the increase resolution tool, this is no longer an issue. If we apply extreme to this cube twice, we can now paint super smooth rounded detail onto this perfectly flat surface. As well as the brush tool, we can also apply a smooth gradient to it. But perhaps most importantly, we can now apply a photo to a perfectly flat surface, which can then be processed for printing in CMYKW. Now we get to the process and export section, and there's a few new things here. In CMY mode, there's nothing new, but if we select a mode which includes white filament, black filament, or both, the color cleaner section appears. In here we have 3 options. Clean white and clean black are ways of ensuring that areas of white or black on your print don't feature random lines of colour making them messy. These lines happen if there's a white or black on the model which isn't quite pure white or pure black, or if there's a very slight variance to it. In that case, other colours are introduced into the dithering mix, even if that mix is otherwise just solid black or solid white, to produce the desired colour. But at such a low percentage, it often doesn't blend in and just doesn't look good with this method of printing. With this selected, it will take all of the white colours that are almost but not quite white, and it will convert it to pure white in the export. With it selected, you can choose the severity, with light only taking into account very slight variance, and aggressive converting significantly off whites. Note, this happens in the processing stage, so there isn't a preview of the changes you make here, but providing you don't close the window after exporting, you can just change this setting and hit process again. This is the same feature for both white and black filaments. Vivid colours is a similar feature, but it reduces the usage of black and white filament inside areas of more bold colour. White and black are used within these colours to brighten or darken them, but they often don't blend well, so by ticking this, you can reduce the amount that will happen. This will give you bolder and cleaner colours, but they may be less accurate to the original colour tone. Finally, with a couple of little adjustments, we've now got a settings button here to open a settings window. Currently, this just features the light and dark mode switch, which is also available in the bottom right of the standard display, as well as the ability to set the hex code for the filament you'll be printing with. We also now have a basic About section, and the Help and Tips section has been updated with all of the new features and functions. This update also features quite an extensive list of bug fixes and smaller improvements that you can find if you hit the version number at the bottom of the screen, which takes you to the update log. From here, you can also go back to any previous public version to access and use it if you preferred an older iteration. As I mentioned, there's been some fantastic suggestions for new features and improvements in the comments, so keep them coming. One common suggestion I've had is to use the black filament as a subsurface colour rather than being dithered into the colour lines. This would provide significantly cleaner and bolder images and colour, whilst providing more diffused shading and colour tones. This is a great suggestion, and it's something I've been playing with in my mind for a while. However, Prime 3D currently works by exporting a 3MF with the colour data. When imported into a slicer, that colour data is only applied to the surface, and the internal colour division is decided by the slicer itself. The potential workaround that I'm currently considering is to have Prime 3D produce a second copy of the model with a surface offset, making it slightly smaller, and then inside the 3MF having that smaller model positioned inside the main model, set as a modifier with the black filament. This would then cause the slicer to set that internal area as the black filament. However, as soon as you apply any colour to the external surface of the model, it can become problematic and ignore that internal modifier definition. If you have any other suggestions of how Prime 3D could instruct the slicer to use a different filament for the internal walls of a model at varying depths, please let me know in the comments. I've been working pretty full on Prime 3D recently, and whilst I have a lot of plans for further improvements and updates here, I also have a lot of 3D printing and make tech content on its way very soon, including a slightly different long-form deep dive which will be with you almost imminently, and even sooner for my channel members, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss them. If you find Prime 3D interesting or useful, please do pop me a like and a hype, it's really appreciated. And if you would like to support me making more like this in the future, you can become a channel member and get yourself early access to my videos, early access to some of the Prime 3D updates, some exclusive member content, access to the 3D Rev Discord community, and more. Just hit join below any of my videos. As always, thanks very much everyone, and until next time, happy printing. A massive thank you to my revolutionaries, my channel members. Without you, Prime 3D wouldn't exist. If you'd like to join them, hit join below any of my videos. For now, why not chuck on one of my other videos to learn something new or just have some fun. Thanks very much everyone, and until next time, happy printing.